PR 584982, the state versus Hansel and Gretel. All those having business in this court may be seated. Counsel for the prosecution, are you ready to proceed?
Yes.
Counsel for the defense, are you ready to proceed? Counsel, whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Rosina was murdered. No? Not murdered. Incinerated. Alive in the sanctity of her own home. What we know is that the victim welcomed these two defendants into our own home, fed them well, provided them with comfortable beds for one whole month on her own accord. That, you will see, is indisputable. What I ask of you today, ladies and gentlemen, is to consider one simple thing. These defendants, who the defense will say were held in captivity for a full month, who the defense will say were scared of being eaten alive by an evil witch, these defendants had an opportunity to escape, a chance to be free. And yet, they didn't take it. They stopped. And they looked around the house for jewels. What I ask of you today is not to let the defense claim that these children are purely innocent. Because while these defendants carried in their hands a chest that would weigh much more than them, Rosina could not defend herself. Rosina did not get out of the oven. She could not get out of the oven because she was burning alive in 450-degree heat. They're lying. The truth is that the victim, an old, disabled, half-blind lady, welcomed these two abandoned children into her home. And even if they thought that she posed a threat to them, they did not knock her down. They did not take the knife or the pan or the kettle, which we will show was an arm reach of the oven. No, they did not do any of those things. What they did is they picked her up, a fully grown adult. They picked her up and they shoved her in her oven. They turned the dial to its maximum heat. And while she was burning alive, they walked around and shot the jewels. Please, do not let the defense allow you to feel sorry for these defendants, because they are liars. And they will continue to lie, because they conspired to murder an old, disabled woman and steal her jewels.
Indisputable and relative facts. The indisputable relative facts show that Hansel and Gretel, the defendants, met Rosina in the forest while eating her property, damaging her home. But instead of calling the cops, instead of defending her home and chasing them away, she let them in. She fixed their beds, their clothes, fed them food, gave them shelter. A kind act. Altruism. They had enough food for a month. Enough to avoid desperate acts of starvation, like cannibalism. And it is evident because, look, they're healthy. they're physically healthy and they're not injured at all. Now, what is adding injury to the injured, kicking the person while they're down, it's a metaphor, is that not only did they repay her kindness with death, they repaid her kindness by claiming that she was a cannibalist. A cannibalist. They assassinated her character by saying that she ate children, specifically children. And it doesn't make any sense. They're in the middle of the forest. If her diet was of people, wouldn't she be close to the town? Wouldn't she have at least a pathway to her home? And if they were actually being abused, wouldn't they have marks? Wouldn't they be traumatized physically? This is bizarre. This whole story is bizarre. And it's outrageous. The only crime is that she had done is that she's dead. Rosina's dead. And she let them get away with that.
Who here has a pet? Who here has a cage for that pet? Okay. Indeed, although there was a cage in Miss Rosina's house, there often is a cage in a house of a past pet owner, like herself. The defense will claim that this cage was for Hansel, and that Hansel was imprisoned in this cage for that month. There is no proof of this. Even the logistics of it, let's imagine. So, 88-year-old Miss Rosina, crippled and half blind, takes young Hansel and shoves him into the cage, locks it, while Gretel sits there unfettered, watching as her brother gets shoved into the cage. She doesn't try to handle that, left foot dragging, half blind. She doesn't try to fight back. And then for a month, he stays in this cage. Gretel doesn't think maybe to come up, sneak up on her, steal the key, or maybe use brute force, take the key. It just doesn't make any sense. Miss Rosina lived in a comfortable den of home. She had beds for these children. She made breakfast for these children. She would take them, tuck them in at night, crutch over the door, turn the light off, go down the stairs. They'd wake up, they'd come down, she'd make breakfast, lunch and dinner for them. Then a month later, Miss Rosina had no idea that she would be cooked in this oven just as those meals were cooked for those children.
As first respondent, we will call Officer William Pauley to the stand, and he will testify that upon arrival to the crime scene, he found extensive destruction of property, which the defendant admitted responsibility. He will testify that Miss Rosina's chest of precious stones were missing, stolen, found in the possession of the defendants. He will testify that in the kitchen, it was well equipped with pots and pans, all within arm's reach of this oven. And with his years of defensive training, he will testify that given Rosina's physical disabilities, that these objects could have been used as self-defense, if need be. So, if the defendants were truly in danger, they had countless options to impair the already impaired Miss Rosina, if truly endangered, they didn't even have time to consider shopping around the house and stealing her precious stones. So, not only did the defendants trespass and damage private property, they robbed Ms. Rosina. They robbed her of her property and her life.
Ladies and gentlemen, when the defense comes up here to try to trick your minds into thinking that the two defendants are innocent, I want you to forget everything they tell you. Make that mental note. Because what we have here, these two defendants in front of you today, are simply liars. They will try to distract you from the truth by trying to convince you that Rosina was an evil and powerful witch that attempted to eat the defendants. They will try to convince you that just because the defendants had children, that means that they're innocent. And just because the victim happens to be a witch, that means that she's guilty. They will try to trick you into thinking that just because there's a cage in her house, that means that she imprisoned them in it. No matter how many distractions they will try to come up with, I am asking you not to fall in their traps. We do understand that the defendants are children, but that does not mean that they cannot do irreparable harm. They need to understand that their actions have consequences. We, as a justice system, need to hold even children accountable for their actions. Ladies and gentlemen, Hansel and Gretel have heartlessly murdered and theft Rosina's house. They have repaid her kindness with a heartless murder and thievery. Nothing else fits the facts. The defendants murdered Rosina, who for the last month in her life had done more for them than their own parents had done. I leave it to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to right this wrong. Because an innocent and kind woman has lost her life. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel for defense, you may proceed whenever you're ready.
These children have been failed by society. They have been failed by their parents. And if the prosecution gets their way, society will fail them yet again. Hansel and Gretel come from impoverished roots. Their parents abandoned them in the woods because they could not feed them. Hansel and Gretel found themselves alone in the woods, scared, abandoned, having only each other as comfort. They found themselves in a situation that epitomized their short lives on this planet, abandoned by everyone else, failed by everyone else, finding hope and security only in each other. And then they thought that everything had been fixed. They thought that some higher power had seen through their dark reality and taken them into good grace. They came upon a house, a seemingly physical manifestation of everything that they had been longing for. And along with this house came a woman, a seemingly promising woman who offered them the sense of comfort in reality. They thought that this woman was finally someone that they could rely on, someone that they could trust. She welcomed them into her house, fed them, gave them that, in the sense that their troubles finally been finished. Ladies and gentlemen, these thoughts of theirs, these conceptions, could not be further from the reality that befell their poor lives.
During the course of this trial, you will hear from the coroner, who will testify to the evidence that was found inside the candy-covered house. Evidence such as demonic inscriptions on the floor. Evidence such as cookbooks with cannibalistic recipes inside. Evidence such as children's bones in the basement. There is no shadow of a doubt that this old woman was an active and practicing witch, and Hansel and Gretel were merely the last victims in a long, long line of victims. When Hansel woke up the next morning, his hands and his feet were bound tightly, and the witch hauled and kicked him across the floor, stuffed him into a cage where he lay on the cold stone. Every day he was force-fed, because this witch's appetite was so voracious that she needed to fatten him up before she ate him. She would poke and prod him through the bars of the cage to test to see if he was ready to be butchered. Every day, Hansel wondered whether that day would be his last. And it was only through his ingenious, quick thinking that he thought to give the witch a bone instead of his finger that he survived as long as he did. Now, Gretel was not enslaved, it was not caged, but she was made a child slave. She was not only made to serve her captor, but to participate and watch as her brother was ready to be slaughtered. Watching every day and wondering whether today would be the day the witch decided to eat her brother. Her brother. The only other human being who had always been there for her. The only human being who had cried with her through every tragedy, again and again. The only one who loved her. And she watched, knowing that there was no one else who could save him but her.
Four weeks later, the day of their escape, Gretel's hair is unbrushed and brittle, her skin pale from lack of sunlight, and her body more frail than ever before. She drags herself to go check on Hansel, still trapped behind the bars of his cage. She sticks her finger through those bars and touches it to his. In the only way they can, they try to comfort the only person they have left in the world. This sense of comfort only lasts a moment, though. Gretel knew that day was different. In the kitchen, the witch was already constructing a fire in the oven, cackling as she tossed kindling onto the flames. Gretel had sensed her growing impatience, as every day she tested Hansel's finger, never satisfied with how plump it was. And Hansel had tried to stall her, tried to buy them more time for Gretel to find another means of escape, but to no avail. Shaking, Gretel turns her gaze from the oven back to Hansel, the only person she still has left in this world, the only person she was sworn to protect, and she watches as a tear rolls silently down his face. Gretel snaps back to attention as the witch barks at her to come towards the oven. She cringes under the feeling of a wrinkled hand and sharp nails pressing against her back, urging her towards the flames. Gretel can feel her heart pulsing through every part of her body. Her hair stands on end despite the heat in the kitchen. She was going to die. The witch was going to cook her alive and devour her. Gretel paused, stalling, looking for any way to buy herself more time. Frustrated, the witch goes over herself to the oven to check the temperature. Gretel heart pounding, alarm bells ringing in her ears, finally sees her opportunity to save herself and her brother. With a shove, the witch tumbles under the oven and the door is secured behind her. Gretel sprints over to her brother and frees him from his cage. Hardly able to stand after weeks of entrapment, Hansel rises trembling to his feet and embraces his sister. Gretel, her baby brother finally back in her arms, turns her thoughts immediately to getting them home.
The prosecution would like for us to believe that the witch was nothing more than a weak, elderly old woman. This is all some sort of big misunderstanding. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, from what we've heard here today so far, from what you will see in the evidence going forward, nothing can be further from the truth. Although on the surface she may have appeared to be an average elderly woman, the truth is that the wear of time expressed in her appearance was nothing more than a guise to conceal what she truly was, a predator. You must put yourself in the shoes of these two trembling children, whom society had failed and abandoned, to understand that this allegedly fragile old witch was actually physically able enough to drag Hansel and shove him into a cage, and mentally attuned to the point that she was able to subdue Gretel for weeks. Now, while the prosecution will suggest alternative solutions, which they believe Hansel and Gretel should have considered in the heat of their escape, we believe that their testimonies from their lived experiences during imprisonment will demonstrate that the panic they showed at the moment of escape was totally acceptable. Both siblings will testify that from the moment the witch dragged Hansel, shoved him into that tiny little cage as if he was a baby cow being turned into veal, they knew that they were in grave danger. Furthermore, the prosecution will attempt to distract you with the detail of the taken jewels, which the children readily turned over to the police. The fact of the matter is that it has absolutely nothing to do with the case. We are not here to try two children on counts of burglary. We are here to decide whether to imprison these children once again for their daring escape from the clutches of the witch.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, as you make this important decision, I would like you to look not only at the indisputable facts of this situation, but also to our young Hansel and Gretel. Hansel was kept in a cage so small, he couldn't stretch his legs. A cage so small, he couldn't turn around. For 4 endless weeks, 28 days, Gretel was made to be at the beck and call of the woman who had produced her little baby brother, the only person she had to turn to in a world that had rejected her. She reduced him to a state where all he could do was whimper helplessly. Take a moment to look at the world through their naive young eyes. Trusting in human kindness, abandoned by those meant to cherish them, they were drawn into a world of misery when all they wanted to do was live. This was no ordinary person that imprisoned them. This was someone who had children's bones scattered on their floor. This was someone who had books on how to kill and eat a human on their shelves. In the 4 weeks that Hansel and Gretel were kept captive, only one attempt was made to escape. There was no premeditation, with Gretel using only the tools directly in front of her to protect her baby brother and herself. This witch, in capturing Hansel and Gretel, shows that she has the power to cage Hansel and place Gretel in servitude. There is no doubt that she also has not only the power, but the conviction to kill and eat these children. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. Before you make your decision, I would like to remind you once again that your job here is not to decide whether a crime has been committed, but whether it was one in which the actions taken are proportionate to the danger the children were facing. With a fiery death ahead of them, Hansel and Gretel did the only thing they could to do what they've been struggling with for so long, staying alive.
Thank you. This court is adjourned. All rise. The jury may now excuse themselves to go and deliberate.